I remember, the lexicon was, it's the end of history, and the world will now be flat, and every country is now going to naturally become a free enterprise democracy, and economic liberalization would always result in political freedom. Right? You flood a country with capitalism, and that country will not just get rich, but they're going to turn into us, or some version of one of our democratic allies. And so in pursuit of that historic gamble, which had no historic precedent, we entered into all kinds of trade deals and treaties and rules and regulations on an international scale, and we invited into that all kinds of countries that, by the way, were not democracies, did not share our values, and did not have the same long-term goals for the world as we did. Their long-term goals, in fact, were incompatible. And of all the deals that were made, none has had a greater impact than the decision that was made in the first year of this century to admit China into the World Trade Organization. They opened up our economy to the most populous nation on earth, controlled by a communist regime, and they did it not because anybody argued that would be good for American workers or they made the arguments that eventually it would be, but they weren't arguing this is going to help us in the short term, this is good for our industries. They did it, one of the arguments, the central arguments behind doing this with China was, we think capitalism will change them. Okay? They're going to eat Big Macs and drink Coca-Cola, and they're going to literally ingest democracy, and it will transform them. Okay? They argued that capitalism was going to change China. Now we stand here 23 years later and realize capitalism didn't change China. China changed capitalism. They opened up their doors and said, come on in. And they attracted with cheap labor. They said, we have cheap labor, cheap workers, and it flooded. Millions of American jobs, important industries, factories flooded into China. And they did it with the promise of the lure of American investors. American money poured into China. All of it with the promise that you can make a lot of money in this huge market very quickly. Huge rates of return. And obviously for the companies, lower labor costs, and therefore more profits for them. And we lost jobs, and factories closed, and towns were gutted. But the leaders at that time said, don't worry, they're only taking the bad jobs. The jobs that have left, these are not the good jobs. These bad jobs are going to be replaced by good jobs, better jobs. Americans are going to be able to have those jobs. And those Chinese workers that took your jobs, they're going to get richer now. And with that money they've started to make, they're going to do two things. They're going to start buying American products, and they are going to they're going to demand for democracy and freedom, and they're going to change China. Well, I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time today explaining that did not work out. That is not how it played out. China allowed our companies in. But you know what they did? They forced every one of these companies to partner with a Chinese company, a small one at the time. They forced you to partner with them, and they stole your trade secrets. So they invited them in, they learned how to do whatever it is you did, and when they no longer needed you, they kicked you out, their company took over, and in many cases, they put the company that taught them how to do it, or that they stole the secrets from, they put them out of business. That's what they did. They used it to build up their own economy, their own companies. The Chinese middle class also grew at a historic rate. But ours collapsed. An almost inverse effect. The numbers are stunning. If you look at the destruction of these American working class jobs and the rise of the middle class in China, they happen at the same time and at almost at the same scale. China did get rich. They most certainly got rich, but they didn't use that money to buy our products. They used that money to buy the products that are made in China. And they didn't become a democracy either. Now what you have is what was once a poor Chinese Communist Party. Now you have a rich Chinese Communist Party that has tightened its grip on the country, and it's actually started going around the world trying to export their authoritarian model. They literally go around telling countries democracy cannot solve problems. Our system is so much better at solving problems. We can move quicker. We don't have to have a town hall meeting before we do everything. We can have strategic 20-year plans, and we can solve your problems. And for developing countries around the world, it potentially has some appeal. The fact is that we're now confronted with the consequences of this historic and catastrophic mistake. And it's important to understand what some of these are, and they'll be familiar to you because we see them every day. They play out not just on the floor of the Senate, they play out in our society and our politics on television. First, we're a nation that's bitterly divided. And it's easy and lazy to say, well, we're divided, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives. This division is, frankly, the biggest division. Americans are not even ideological per se. They seem to be attitudinal, and largely they seem to be along the lines of affluent class of people that work in jobs and careers and in industries and live in places that have benefited from this rearrangement of the global economy. They do jobs that pay well and that work in a system like this, divided against the millions of working people who are left behind by all these changes and live in places that are literally hollowed out, once vibrant communities that have been gutted. By the way, remember when they would say, don't worry, those people will move to somewhere else in the country for those new jobs? They didn't move, because people don't like to leave their community. They don't like to leave their extended family. They don't like to leave all the things they've ever known and supported them. That didn't work that way. It's left us a country that's addicted. We are addicted to cheap exports from China. And we are dependent on Chinese supply chains, on everything from food to medicine to advanced technology. We just had a pandemic that reminded us of this. And what does that mean, these long supply chains dependent on a geopolitical competitor? It means we're vulnerable. Vulnerable to blackmail, vulnerable to coercion. You know what else it left us with? An economy that is highly concentrated and fragile. Our economy is primarily based today on two sectors. What's all the news about? Turn on the financial networks. You'll see what all the discussion is about. Primarily two sectors. Finance, meaning people that take your money and invest it somewhere else. They don't make anything. They invest your money. It's fine. That's a legitimate business. But finance and big tech. And those two industries that are now the pillar of our economy are controlled by just a small number of giant multinational corporations. The same ones that, by the way, outsourced our jobs. And these multinational corporations, they have more power than the government. In many cases, they have more power than the government. And they have no loyalty to our people or to our country. Their interest is not the national interest. They're multinationals. In fact, they're owned by shareholders and investment funds from all over the world.